This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
All right. Last show for a while. Let's make it a good one. If you missed the Monday show, I did a quick channel update at the beginning. I'm going to be out of commission for basically the remainder of June and partial dates in July. It's nothing serious. It's business related. I went over the details pretty thoroughly on the Monday show, so make sure you go back and listen to that one to get the full details. And I'm going to do my best to make it worthwhile here. Got to go out with a bang instead of a whimper. Or I guess it'd be more apropos to call this the season finale. And then we'll return for more FSWR fun over the midsummer. How about that? This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. For anybody new to the show, we are the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everybody needs. It's been my moniker for several months now. All in good fun. But if you're checking out the show for the first time, make sure you subscribe, comment, give the show a like. This would typically be the part where I say that new shows come out every Monday and Friday, but since I'm going to be on a hiatus for about a month, it's probably not the best time to make that statement now. Still, do make sure you subscribe, comment, and give the show a like. Help me out in the YouTube algorithms where you can. Lord knows I need it. The more Rumble grows in popularity, the more YouTube continues to suffer. And I am more than okay with that, given the nature of YouTube's set up to fail system in 2025. Scumbags. I've been stuck at 121 subscribers for like 2 weeks now. And I know for a fact that YouTube is intentionally trying to shadow ban my videos in the search results. Rumble ain't perfect, but at least my shows do moderately okay over there in terms of viewership. YouTube, not so much. Barely lucky to crack 100 viewers most weeks. In any case, we have quite a bit to talk about on today's show. It is going to be a normal Friday episode, so if you were hoping to get some big epic season finale, sorry. It was a pretty average week in terms of classic wrestling in the archives. Still plenty to talk about though, so let's get into things as normal. And I'll try to keep the entertainment levels up. Although that might be challenging with the TBS show, because my God was this show lame. Alright. So we're back to a 2-hour runtime for the syndicated programming, which means double the amount of bad content. We're coming up on the Fort Bragg Clash of Champions in about a week and a half. If you aren't familiar with that particular Clash event, it's where we saw the epic, inspiring debut of the Ding Dongs. Another assorted cast of bad characters. It was also, I believe, one of the hottest recorded venues to ever host a wrestling event. And I don't mean hot as in good. I mean hot as in scorching heat. They were holding the event on a military base, so there was no air conditioning in the building. Everyone was practically dying of heat stroke by the time the thing was over. Plus, the show sucked. But that was just the icing on the cake. And if you're wondering how much promotion they've done on television to let everybody know that this Clash event is still coming up, there's your answer. So we opened this week with what I think was an impromptu TV match. Ron Simmons was just standing in the ring by himself with his wrestling gear. And then Ranger Ross showed up unannounced. I think Rhubarb Jones made the announcement, Ranger Ross requested this matchup. And so we get it. Ranger Ross versus Ron Simmons. Which is obviously a critical part to what we saw last week in the tag tournament when Simmons left Ross to be fed to the Samoans. And he decided to link arms with Teddy Long. So they didn't even bother waiting to blow this off at the Clash. They just did it on free TV the week after the split. So Ross spends like 7 minutes beating up Simmons. Simmons got in little to no offense for the entirety of the fight. Finally, Simmons gets cornered. And while he's laying down in the corner, Teddy Long goes over to feed him a gimmick so he can cold cock Ranger in the jaw to pin him. It did lead to some pretty good banter between JR and Michael Hayes during the replay, where Hayes was trying to claim that Teddy was just helping Simmons to pop his knuckle back into place. JR just snidely goes, "Oh, so Teddy's a chiropractor now, huh?" That is one thing that people criminally underrate about Jim Ross as a commentator. Everyone always talks about him being the straight shooter. He was a witty guy. Especially when he was interacting with the biased heel commentators. So, there's your alleged payoff to the short-lived Ron Simmons-Ranger Ross feud. Thanks for coming, Ranger. And then we came back for Ricky Santana versus Joe Cruz. There's a name I haven't thought about in a while. Remember when they tried to give Ricky Santana a push under the Crockett regime? Yeah, he got over like a wet fart in church. Decent athlete. But a total blank slate of a personality. One might have thought he would have tried to develop some kind of personality while he was gone. Nope. Turns out he was the exact same bland piece of meat that we saw work the last time he was here. Drier than a nun's twat. It's been, what, 2 years since we saw him? And the crowd apparently agreed with me. About 5 minutes into the thing, half the center stage crowd was chanting boring. And it was indeed boring. They just did basic chain wrestling for a while. There was nothing visually wrong with anything they did. It was just a cold match. An exhibition, if you will. Ricky won with a flying forearm. The old classic Manny Fernandez finish. The flying burrito. One of my favorite finishing moves. The only thing I mildly enjoyed about this was the moment JR started plugging the Boston Gardens. Without missing a beat, Michael Hayes immediately started ripping into Boston and talked about how he was excited to see his good friend Dick Wood. By the way, when he said the name Dick Wood, complete silence from JR. That was the part that made me laugh. He was either laughing or probably shaking his head thinking, this fucking asshat. Dick Wood. As if. Yeah, Hayes basically said that Boston sucks. The women are fat. The food's terrible. He's not looking forward to going back. I can confirm, having been to Boston myself, I don't know about the women. I wasn't that observant. It's been almost 15 years. But the food, from what I remember, was very mid. Plus, it's Boston, so it's a shit show of a major city anyway. Crime was pretty bad when I was there in the mid-2000s. I'm pretty sure it's only gotten substantially worse. Because everything's only gotten worse with major metropolitan areas since I was a kid. Now we had Dick Murdoch versus George South. If you haven't already sensed a theme, there was a lot of wrestling on this week's show. Not much in the way of promos or story angles, which was deliberately done because Jim Herd actively hated talking segments. We did learn here that Bob Orton is still apparently feuding with Dick Murdoch. Why? Fuck if I know. But he and Gary Hart were at the interview station talking smack the whole time. Yet this actually seemed to do more in advancing the Great Muda's feud with Eddie Gilbert, rather than advancing anything with Murdoch and Orton. Gary would not shut up about the Dragon Shy challenge. I still don't know what it is, but he keeps mentioning it. So Murdoch went over with a brainbuster. Then they immediately go from that to this pre-tape promo where Teddy Long pitched to another Norman the Lunatic video package, where he was talking about picking berries in the park with his mom or something, and all the kids used to make fun of him, and yeah, that was where I basically stopped paying attention. He vowed that he would be in everybody's nightmares. And with a face like that, he wasn't kidding. I still have nightmares after having looked at that face all those years ago. That is a face only a mother could love. That took us to Ricky Steamboat versus Bootleg Magnum TA, the artist formerly known as Trent Knight. Here's everything I wrote. Ricky won with a chicken wing hold. I shit you not, that was the only thing I got out of it. They had a match. Ricky dominated most of it. Trent Knight yet again did nothing to impress me. It's been, I don't know, 3 years of watching him do jobs for the stars in WCW. He never gets any better. Actually, that might not be entirely accurate. He started off miserably bad. Now he's semi-competent. He can actually hold his own without visibly fucking up spots left and right. That is an improvement. A drastic one. Trust me, I've reviewed plenty of rotten-ass squash matches on the Saturday TBS shows. Trent Knight is far from the worst. He's no Dawn Valentine. Yes, for the record, I still remember the Chris Champion match. It is iconically terrible. Oh, by the way, on the subject of Trent Knight, we'll be revisiting him in a couple segments. I know what you're thinking. Did these numbskulls actually air 2 consecutive squash matches featuring Trent Knight on the same episode? You betcha. They were that incompetent. Before that, they played a video package to highlight the brawls between the Road Warriors and the Samoans. And they sure have been doing a lot of brawling recently. They've been brawling hinder and yawn for the better part of the last month. It's not to say any of it's been good. It hasn't been. I'm still infuriated by that finish decision to the Road Warriors Freebirds match from a few weeks back. But it all led to this pre-tape promo where the Legion of Doom are talking about loving the fighting spirit of the Samoans. But after Hawk and Animal get done with them, SST is going to have a new meaning. It's going to stand for Super Sorry Twits. Yes, Hawk actually said that out loud. He used the word twit as a slander. Wow. I can only imagine Samu and Fatu are shaking in their boots as we speak. So guess who was back to wrestle another TV squash? Yup, you guessed it. Fucking Trent Knight. He's just back standing in the ring again. These people were utterly clueless. They taped a bunch of matches for several weeks of television. Nobody in that fucking production room looked at the final release and said, "Hey, does anybody else notice that we got Trent Knight working 2 squash matches this week? Back to back, no less." They just let it slip by. Committee didn't even think twice about it. God, these people are so inept. How does that even happen? How do you not look at the tape beforehand and say to somebody, you know, maybe we ought to swap the Scott Steiner-Trent Knight match with something else, since the people already saw Trent Knight wrestle this week? Doesn't that kind of break the immersion that this stuff is supposed to be happening live? Not to say it's improbable for the same guy to work 2 matches on the same episode, but when we literally just saw him wrestle Steamboat not 2 segments prior, then he's just back out there wrestling fresh as a daisy like nothing ever happened. Come on. Seriously? So yeah, we get Trent Knight back out there to do another job. Good thing it wasn't the other way around, where they aired the Scott Steiner match before the Ricky Steamboat match. Then I would have been calling bullshit. Especially with the way this went down. So we got Scotty wrestling this week with white trunks and no knee pads. Considering how shot his knees were by the time we got to the late 90s, you'd have thought Scott was crazy to ever wrestle without knee pads. So we muscled Trent around for a few minutes, and wound up going over with the belly to belly. Rick Steiner gave Nancy a fist bump before the match began. God, Nancy was so gorgeous. I know people love to fawn over Missy Hyatt from back in the day. And yeah, she was pretty. But dude, Nancy was just on a whole different level. I don't even think it's close. If Missy was a 10 on the scale to the average horny guy, Nancy was a solid 15 and a half. And here she was nothing more than dorky Rick Steiner fangirl with giant eyeglasses. Wait till she comes out wearing sequin skirts every week. My God. Oh. So hey, guess what they followed that wrestling match with? Yeah. Another fucking wrestling match. And not just a wrestling match, but a squash match. Because we haven't already seen enough of those this week. This time we get the SST versus Deke River and Joe Kazana. Hold on a sec. I gotta check something. Joe Kazana. That name sounds familiar somehow. Did I completely forget the fact that he wrestled Ricky Santana? Oh no. I stand corrected. That was Joe Cruz. Okay then. It was good to know they didn't fuck it up twice this week. I was mainly laughing at Deke River here. I kid you not. Hayes said that Deke River looked like Elvis Presley floating in the river 2 days after his death. A, he wasn't wrong. And B, it was hilarious. By the way, confirmed. Deke River was far, far worse than Trent Knight. Both visually and athletically. So the Samoans spent most of the match demolishing him. They ended up pinning Kazan after Fatu flew halfway across the ring for a big splash. And, well, I wrote this down on paper. It wasn't hyperbole. I believe they actually did this. Samu broke a raw pineapple over Deke River's head. Didn't draw money or leave any kind of impression like when Roddy Piper cracked the coconut over Jimmy Snuka's head. But it was funny hearing JR call that spot. He broke a pineapple over his head. A statement that I never thought I would hear JR utter. So as we roll into the top of the hour, finally a little something to break the monotony. We got some good solid sports entertainment. Because that's what we desperately needed at this point in the program. Some WWF light sketch comedy. So out comes Terry Funk to the interview booth. As we were told last week, Funk said that he was going to offer to fly Ric Flair to center stage so he could go face-to-face with him. And, well, we got Ric Flair. It just wasn't the Ric Flair anybody was expecting. Instead, we get some half-wit buggy whip arm goof dressed in low-rent Ric Flair attire. He had a really crappy blonde wig. and his name was spelled Rickflaire. So remember when I was like, hey, maybe they're actually going to have the real Ric Flair show up and get a quick ratings grab out of it. Well, I got played. Instead, we get this fucking horse trash. So we had the fake Ric Flair woo. Spent several minutes raking him over the coals and trying to make this work to the best of his ability. I'm not even sure Terry Funk was talented enough to make this passable. He makes the guy take his robe off to reveal a giant yellow streak down his back. Because that's what Ric Flair is. A yellow egg sucking dog. And finally things pick up a little bit when Sting interrupts and starts calling out Funk for his BS. Tells Funk that he has a cold chill running up his spine right now. And he doesn't think Funk has the guts to fight him right now. At which point, Funk immediately starts making his way to the ring to challenge the Stinger. And they get into a brief little scuffle around ringside until a handful of the underneath guys empty out from the back. And by that I mean, most of them just kind of aimlessly stood around pretending to get involved. Surprise, it was the best thing on the entire show. And it was one of the only storyline angles that they actually advanced in a 2-hour window. Well, okay, I lied. Second best. The Midnight's Return was far better. Oh, by the way, when I say best thing, I'm obviously referencing the brawl with Sting and Funk. The stuff with the fake Ric Flair was hideously bad television. But the second half was at least good. Considering how bad Terry's back was during this period in his life, that guy was bumping like crazy for Sting here. Flipping over the guardrail, laying awkwardly on his tailbone a couple times. Guy was fucking nuts. We had Tom Pittner versus Kevin Sullivan up next. Sullivan went out to berate Nancy right before the match started. Even tore up her I Love Rick Steiner sign. How rude. Got him a ton of heat, though. Because that's the only thing people chanted for the entire match. Was "We want Steiner." I think by this point you could pretty much tell that Nancy was more than just a plant. I mean, they're frequently putting her on camera now in multiple segments on the show, so you could tell something's up. The stuff with Sullivan and Nancy never gets any less uncomfortable to talk about, especially if you know their backstory. I think he was married to Nancy for at least a couple years by this point. Maybe longer, actually. I think we can all agree that those two are a great example of why it's never a good idea to get your female spouse involved in the wrestling business. Evidently, it does not end well. Sullivan went over with a pair of double foot stomps. Steve Casey wrestled the great Muta. Muta spent like half the match putting Casey in a nerve hold. I'm sure that was their way of saying, you know what'll stop the people from cheering Muta? Seeing him do less impressive high spots. Let's have him put Casey in a stationary nerve hold for 5 minutes. I don't think it helped. The fans were still very much behind Muta here. Casey made a brisk comeback, only to get cut off when he missed a charge in the corner. Then we get a really scary finish where Muta tried to give Casey the moonsault, but he was way out of position to take it. So when Muta came down, he landed with one foot planted on the ring mat, and the other foot went right into Steve Casey's ribcage. God, that had to have hurt like a motherfucker. No idea how he didn't cause any internal damage. I think about it, that was all of Muta's body weight coming down with his right foot. And he just planted that sucker right into Casey's midsection. God, that had to have sucked. But finally, we get a match that wasn't just a generic squash. It's the third round for the World Tag Team Title Tournament. The single worst goddamn tournament in recorded history. And yes, that takes into account every shitty gimmick tournament that Russo ever booked in TNA or WCW. This did mark the return of the Midnight Express, which is a positive. They were supposed to wrestle the team of Butch Reed and Bob Orton Jr., but right as the heels were about to get into the ring, Dick Murdoch showed up and got into a fight with Orton at ringside, which led to my favorite trope in wrestling that I love to rag on. They fought off to the back, wherein that left Butch Reed in the ring by himself with no tag partner. We never saw nor heard from either Dickie or Cowboy Bob for the remainder of the show. They just vanished into the ether. So Reed is standing around wondering what the fuck's going on. And eventually Teddy Long makes his way out to inform Reed that he found him a replacement partner for this match. No, it was not Ron Simmons. It was the Grappler. By the way, there was no actual big reveal for this moment. They just came back from break and there he was. Standing in the ring next to Hacksaw Reed with Pete in hand. Alongside Bobby, Stan, and JC, who did not get their ring entrance shown for their big return. They were also just in the ring like a pair of job guys. So Cornette did the introductions. There were genuine tears of joy from the crowd when they saw the Midnights here. Probably thinking, thank God we'll actually get some quality wrestling for a change. We did get a great line from Cornette where he called Teddy Long Peanut Head. Then he said that if he tries to get involved here, he's going to make Teddy grow hair in places that he hasn't grown hair in a very long time. The ironic part is Teddy had more hair here than he did at any other point in his career. He was a bald cue ball before not too long. And about 20 pounds heavier. So he did legitimately look like a giant peanut. So we get several minutes of good solid ring action for the Midnights. The heels cut off and double team Stan for a little bit. This is the moment where I realized that Beautiful Bobby was wrestling with a chip on his shoulder. He was determined to shove it up Jim Herd's ass here. He thought so little of Bobby and Stan as a tag team before they left earlier this year. Bobby was here to shove it right back in his face. And boy did he. God, he's in there working his ass off. People are going nuts for his comeback. Gives Butch Reed one of the best flying elbow drops I've ever seen. He can stay on knock Reed out to the floor with a clothesline. And they turn around and clock the Raider. Hit him with a double flapjack and score the 1-2-3. It was not the intended match on paper. But who cares? The Midnights are advancing to the next round, where they will be doing battle with the Samoans, which will in turn bring Jim Cornette one step closer to getting his hands on Paul Lee. So at least we have that to look forward to as we move into the summer season. And then with the remaining airtime they had left, they sent out the Discount Rock and Roll Express to work a quick squash match with two unnamed jobbers, one of whom I knew was Bob Emery. I don't think the other guy got mentioned. By the way, when I say Discount R&R, I'm talking about the Dynamic Dudes. They did some relatively unimpressive double team spots for a couple minutes. Johnny hit a shitty RKO on Bob Emery. And then the Dudes gave him a slingshot back suplex for the pin. I prefer the original Rock and Roll over these two. But I also know that we're dealing with 1989 WCW. Star power was few and far between. You take what you can get. The one good thing I take away from this week is that at least the Midnights are back. Was it worth sitting through an hour of cruddy content just to get a 5-minute TV match with them? Not really. Especially when we know they don't wind up winning the whole fucking tournament, which is a crime against humanity. God, this format of television is so bad. Squash match after squash match after squash match after squash match. Lather, rinse, repeat. You know, at least when it was only an hour of that, it was tolerable. But 2 hours? God, it's just miserable. The shows just drag. See, here's the thing. Under the Crockett regime, we did basically just get 2 hours of squash matches every week. You know what we had in the middle of all that, though? Promos and angles. You take away those, it's just a boring-ass television show. But this is the format that Jim Herd wanted. So, them's the breaks. Ric Flair cannot get on that booking committee soon enough. So here's a question with Midsouth this week. Did the show get jinxed by having Joel Watts back on the headset? We had a great TV episode the other week when it was Boyd Pierce and Bill Watts calling the action. This week we were back to Jim Ross and Joel. So how bad did Joel drag the show down with the commentary? Well, he's still no good on color. He wasn't as bad as he's been in the past. At least he could string together a couple coherent sentences at a time without that deer in the headlight expression. All he had to do was plug the guys who are on the card this week. It was still quite the strenuous task for the poor chap. But he did fine. The big main event they advertised for this week was Magnum TA and Mr. Wrestling 2 for the North American title. Now that Magnum is the new champion, after having beat his former coach, Mr. Wrestling, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And that was all covered on last week's show. One of the other things they promoted for this week was a situation that developed down in World Class. We heard at the tail end of last week's episode that gorgeous Jimmy Garvin had officially dumped Sunshine as his valet. He recently brought aboard Precious to serve as Sunshine's assistant. But things took a turn for the worse when Sunshine and Garvin got into a blow-up with her on television, which led to Sunshine having a nervous breakdown and being, quote, institutionalized, according to JR. And all the while, Chris Adams had recently come in to team up with Sunshine. So we've been getting a mixed tag feud with Garvin and Precious going up against Adams and Sunshine. By the way, this is all stuff we covered in the World Class reviews a couple years ago. So we have documented all this. But of course, there's one more contributing factor to the story. And I'm obviously referring to the recent debut of Stella Mae French, Sunshine's crazy truck-driving auntie. She had recently shown up on television to get back at the heels for having caused Sunshine's mental breakdown. And it also led to some pretty fucking entertaining stuff with her getting into physical confrontations with Precious and Garvin. Mostly Garvin. So they showed us a clip of Mark Lawrence interviewing Chris Adams from Fort Worth, trying to get a better idea of who this Stella Mae French woman is. She is, as Mark noted, wild. And boy was she. So Chris kind of explains that Stella brought Sunshine up during childhood. She was more or less her guardian. And well, then they eventually cut to the clip where we see Stella making her debut in Fort Worth, where she went after Jimmy Garvin and Precious. And she's out there as a one-woman wrecking crew, just throwing soup bones at anything moving in sight. Baby faces and heels alike. That in and of itself was a pretty iconic moment. I still remember the initial footage of seeing Stella show up in World Class for the first time. I was like, if I was in the ring with her versus anybody that is being brought up in the business today, I would hedge my bets that I would be safer working with the people in today's business. I would not want to take a punch from her. She was throwing potatoes left and right. I also recalled the epic promo she did where just about every other word was some kind of curse word. When she was cutting the promo on Garvin and Precious, JR had to mention here that it wasn't suitable for the TV audience, so they had to censor just about every word. But we did get a modified, edited version of the clip, and it is still as great as the time we reviewed it a couple years ago, where she's out there threatening to ram a 2x4 up Garvin's sphincter hole, or bleeping out words like fucking damn. Adams is trying to cut her off mid-promo and be like, you can't say that on TV. Stella's just not having any of it. God, it was a brilliant promo. I don't care what anybody says. That was train wreck level awesomeness. Fuck, dude. I still miss this period of World Class. Moreover, I miss Stella Mae. She was such a great temporary character. I wish her send-off wasn't so abrupt. Because you might remember, she was there, and then one week she was just gone. It was like November or December of '84, there was no real blow-off to her departure. She just disappeared from the equation after Sunshine made her return. And they very quickly shifted gears and started booking Sunshine and Precious to go after each other. Looking back, I think we only got like maybe 2 matches where Stella actually worked. I do remember the one when she was feuding with Gino Hernandez and Baby Doll. Can't remember who she was teaming with at the time. But I know those two had some altercations. That was like one of the best things she did. Say what you want about her. Her segments were must-see television. You just never knew what the hell to expect whenever she would show up. An iconic, underrated personality in the wrestling business. Stella Mae French. She will be missed. But, well, now that we learned about the happenings over in Dallas, what's going on over here in the land of Midsouth? Well, we come back from break with JR and Jim Cornette at ringside. He's here to tell us that after having rewatched the tape from last week, when JC came out here and told everybody that he didn't try to blatantly interfere to attack Robert Gibson with that ether, well, JR watched the film back, and he can confirm that everything Cornette said last week was a blatant lie. Egad. There's a blockbuster announcement. Jim Cornette lied about not blatantly interfering in a critical World Tag Team title match that helped the Midnights to regain the belts? Say it ain't so. So JC basically states that he stands by everything he said. Cornette's not from this part of the country. He's a thorough blue blood from the state of Kentucky. And in Kentucky, a man's word is his bond. Unlike these pesky Louisiana mouth breathers. Cornette does realize that those 2 states are hardcore Republican territory, right? I mean, if you really think about it, how different are places like Kentucky and Louisiana? Remove the big cities. Just the state overall. They ain't that different. So we go to the tape where we see the closing minutes of the tag match. By the way, for those of you that didn't watch last week's show, you need to go listen to my review of that match. Or moreover, just go try to find it somewhere. It is a phenomenal tag match. I mean, the highlights showed the critical parts, but there was still a decent amount of action that came beforehand. The long and short of it is, yes, we clearly saw Cornette helping the Midnights to regain the straps. And when JR tried to once again clarify that everything Cornette said the other week was a lie, the manner in which the Midnights won the belts back, Corny threw it back in JR's face by getting him to admit to the following scenarios. A, it was no DQ. B, the Midnights pinned the Rock and Roll. And C, they were the ones that had their hands raised in victory. So case closed. He's not wrong. Yes, he's deliberately leaving out the fact that the footage proved that the Midnights cheated. But hey, it was no DQ. So, he kind of got him. Remember, 2 things can be true at once. It's not always plain black and white. By the way, I love the bicep pose that Cornette hit right before they cut away. Just the ultimate form of douchebaggery. So proud of himself. So from there, we came back for Dale Veazey and Steve Brinson versus the Rock and Roll Express. Sort of a bounce back win for the Rock and Roll this week after eating the loss. I did need to point out here, there was a rather corpulent-sized elderly woman that was making a beeline toward Ricky Morton during their entrances. Let me tell you something. You have never seen Ricky Morton move so fast to avoid making contact with this woman. I think he looked at her out of his periphery and said, nope. So, VZ missed a running charge. Rock and Roll hit the double drop kick and got the 3. They were definitely more serious here than normal. You know, normally they're out there having a good time and trying to rally the people up. Not this week. Here they were all business. They want their Mid-South tag belts back. No question about it. And then we had a tremendously god-awful TV match. Before I get to that, I did want to make mention of one of the other items of business pertaining to last week. It was where we saw the TV debut of Sonny King, who, for lack of better terms, had a not-so-great first showing for the Mid-South audience. In addition to that really awful promo he tried to cut about the Memphis angle with JYD, Hacksaw Reed, and Buddy Landell. Then he came out later in the program and had that really sloppy brawl with the heels during the post-match involving Buddy. And I even said at the time, I am not looking forward to having to review Sonny's first match in Mid-South. Because I know it's going to be bad. I was so hopeful that I would be proven wrong. I was not. They booked Sonny King versus Masayo Ito. If you have never seen a Sonny King match firsthand, it's an experience. He tried very hard. God, he was jerky and awkward. And like the thing with Sonny is, he was a big dude, but he wasn't very athletic. He was just lanky. Didn't really have any discernible physique. He's kind of like Dan Spivey, but maybe slightly better. God, the threshold is so minimal there. I mean, like at first glance, he definitely looks like somebody that you wouldn't want to pick a fight with. But then after having watched him attempt to do stuff, you're like, nah, I can take him. So he and Masayo are having this really, really bad match. There's a lot of holds and spots where you can tell that Sonny's trying to go over in his head what he's attempting to do. It also probably did not help that his opponent was Masayo Ito, who was also never any good. There's a great moment here where Joel goes, Sonny King is looking to make quick work of the Japanese. There's a pause. And then he finally goes, Starr. It's like he knew he fucked up. So he was trying to course correct immediately. Making quick work of the Japanese. Starr. Messiah got a little bit of heat before Sonny started fighting back with some really goofy-looking punches. Then they proceeded to fuck up an Irish whip spot where Messiah tripped over his own foot and ate shit. I laughed. And then I think Sonny just called headbutt. And he pinned him like 5 seconds later. Brutal. Absolutely brutal. You know, sometimes there are those guys that you remember being infamously bad, but then you see them again years later and realize that they're even worse than you recall. Sonny King is that guy. I always knew he was no good. But holy cow, after only 2 showings, he is so much worse than I remember him being. Fuck. The next match at least briefly made up for it. It is the North American Championship showdown between Magnum TA and Hercules. But with a twist. Now let's rewind to the other week. There was a bit of controversy in the air when we caught wind that Hercules was the one getting the title match. Because we all know what happened when Mr. Wrestling and Magnum were still friends. And Magnum got put ahead of the line in title contention. Well, it led to their breakup, and Mr. Wrestling costing them the Midsouth tag straps. Because he was a bitter, resentful old man. Now, Hercules said that he was fairly confident there would be no issues. Unfortunately, he was mistaken. As Mr. Wrestling and Hercules are walking toward the ring for the match, they're already seen bickering and getting into an argument over something. And that's when Mr. Wrestling tries to take over and stake his claim that he's the one getting the title match this week. Magnum owes him a rematch since it's still within the 30-day window. Boyd Pierce standing up to him and telling him, "I'm introducing the match that was sanctioned for this week. So fuck off." He didn't actually say that part. I just interpret Boyd's voice when I hear that. Fuck off. But this is the moment where Hercules snapped. And he said, "I ain't having any of this." So he grabs Mr. Wrestling and lays him out, disposes of him, and gets back into the ring to wrestle the match as planned. And albeit, there was a very big pop when Hercules laid out his coach. He was still technically a heel in this scenario, because he immediately went after Magnum after the opening bell. They pretty much facilitated the split right then and there. While they're helping Mr. Wrestling to the back, the title match rolls on, to coin a WWE-ism. And this ends up turning into a really enjoyable roller coaster ride, where Hercules is in there beating on Magnum for a while. Magnum's doing a great job selling and getting the people to rally behind him. Eventually, Hercules goes up and misses a diving elbow drop. Magnum starts his comeback, hits him with a belly-to-belly, which did not lead to a 3 count. Hercules powered out at 2.5, which in turn led to Magnum accidentally falling on top of Carl Fergie. And as Hercules went to dump Magnum over the top to the floor, that's when Mr. Wrestling returned to attack his protege. Well, possibly former protege. It's still kind of up in the air. And he hits Wrestling 2 with a knee strap, temporarily knocks him out of the ring. And as it kind of looks like Mr. Wrestling is going to try to steal the match and pull the old switcheroo gimmick, the plan immediately backfires as Magnum hits Mr. Wrestling with a belly-to-belly and sends him packing. When Hercules tries to get back in and go after Magnum, he's immediately cut off with a belly-to-belly. So Magnum pulls off God Mode active, Super Cena-ing his way to retaining the belt. And yes, I legitimately made up a verb on the spot. Cena-ing. Basically, no selling and taking out all the heels by himself with no issue. Despite taking 90% of the match and making a very minute comeback. The miracle performance of a lifetime. But no, seriously, this was good. I liked all the twists and turns. Had a lot of old school Memphis style to it. I like seeing Hercules stand up for himself, refusing to take Mr. Wrestling's BS. He had less tolerance than Magnum did. Christ, how long was it before Magnum finally grew a set of balls and told Mr. Wrestling to go piss up a rope? Months? Took Hercules less than 5 minutes. As soon as he tried to overstep his bounds, Hercules said, "Not today, Junior." And yeah, he still lost. But at least there's now dissension between Mr. Wrestling and Mr. Wrestling 2. A new feud. So we will see how this develops over time. That took us to Buddy Landell and Hacksaw Reed versus Mike Jackson and Mark Reagan. Notice how it only took 2 weeks before they unceremoniously dropped the breakdancing gimmick with Mark Reagan. They also methodically kept him out of the ring for the entirety of the match. And that is no joke. Reagan literally stood on the apron and watched as Jackson took the entire match by himself. He got a brief flurry of offense on Landell at the beginning. Reed took a cheap shot and knocked out Jackson before tagging in. Then the heels spent several minutes beating on Jackson until Reed hit a flying shoulder block and got the 3. One may assume it was done on purpose so that we didn't have to see Reagan wrestle. I would have to concur. And I'm okay with that. That left us with a few minutes for Crusher Khrushchev versus Limpin' Lanny Poffo. Non-title. Even though Khrushchev is still the official television champion. But Dr. Death still has possession of the title. It's been, 3 or 4 weeks now? He still hasn't given it back. Because it didn't really matter since it was non-title. Still, this whole storyline is beyond moronic. The babyface stole the heel's championship. Nobody in management is making him give it back. Whatever. Not really much to say about it. They tried to work the clock as they were running low on time, teasing that Poffo might be able to survive the time limit. But then Khrushchev just put him away with a backbreaker hold anyway. Poffo pretty much sold the whole way through. It is funny when you see where certain guys fall in the pecking order after having been around for a while. Remember like a year ago when Poffo was out there racking up TV wins and they were kind of treating him as one of the higher profile guys on the roster? I mean, he wasn't a tippy-top main event guy, but he was getting a push. And he was working with guys like Magnum TA and Mr. Wrestling 2. Hacksaw Butch Reed, Jim Neidhart, the Russians. Now he's just out there getting served up to everybody. You know, I still think back to that period about a year ago when there were strong considerations of bringing in Randy Savage to team up with his brother. He could have done some serious business with Apophos in Mid-South. He just never came to fruition. It's all Bill Dundee's fault. Fucker. Overall, there was some good stuff this week. It wasn't entirely doomed because Joel was back on commentary. There is still a bit of a spark missing from what Midsouth was doing back in the first few months of programming in '84. But at least we're out of that trench that we were stuck in for the better part of the last month, where the shows were just unbearably boring every week. The Rock and Roll Midnight Feud is obviously what's carrying the bulk of the show in terms of intrigue. But, you know, we got some development with Wrestling 2 and Mr. Wrestling. They're obviously not on the same page anymore. You got Dr. Death and the Russians. Did get me thinking, too, seeing the whole split with the Mr. Wrestlings here. We are going to see him eventually drop that gimmick and become Jim Cornette's muscle with the Midnight Express. That's when he officially becomes Hercules Hernandez. So, we got some development. It was going to be hard to top that tag match from the other week. But we're on an upward rise right now with the booking. That's a good thing. It's just too bad I'm about to miss the next month of it. But that all leads us to the world-class segment of the review. No, we don't have Stella Mae French beating up gorgeous Jimmy Garvin. What we do have, however, is world-class, the Empty Arena edition. Holy smokes, that crowd attendance. That was pitiful. Dreadful. I don't even think they filled up the first 2 rows of seats from the bleacher side. You know, this really was the first week where I noticed how bad the attendance was. I mean, I saw it slipping in the last few months, but my God, the open gaps in the seats for this taping block. Oh, it was brutal. And that sucks too, because there was actually a decent amount of stuff going on this week. Wasn't the greatest wrestling show in the history of the planet, but yeah, there was still a handful of things to talk about. Not just purely the wrestling matches, but some of the new talent that we saw featured. One of those coming right at the beginning of the program, in fact. They had been hyping up the debut of Matt Bourne for a few weeks. And we got Matt Bourne. We got him in a tag match. He was introduced as Tough Matt Bourne. I shit you not, that was his nickname. Tough Matt Bourne. Thank God that didn't stick. So he was teaming up with Killer Tim Brooks as they battled the Batten Twins, who are legit twin brothers that wrestled in various promotions throughout the country in the 80s. I think they actually got their start in ICW, if I'm not mistaken. One of the first recognized American tag teams with twin brothers working together. I think we had a chance to review a couple of their matches when we covered the '86 Crockett Cup. Aside from that, though, They mostly wrestled in the Central States region from what I remember. So we never really saw them working in the Carolinas all that frequently. Of course, we all know Killer Tim Brooks. He'd been in World Class previously doing some main event work alongside Gary Hart. The one thing that stood out immediately was how huge Bourne and Brooks were in comparison to the Baddens. And neither Bourne nor Brooks were tall men by any stretch of the imagination. I think Bourne was a little over 6 feet? I remember he was considered one of the smaller guys in Midsouth when he was there. So that just goes to show how small the Battens were. Made for a good babyface heel dynamic, where the Batten twins got to sell for the bigger, scary guys. I thought Bourne had a solid showing for his debut, and he ends up sticking around with World Class for a while. I think he's there until right before he signs with the WWF in '92, right? Actually, no, he may have gone back to Memphis for a brief stint. I do remember, though, he's in Dallas for a good window of time. Several years. So the heels dominated a good chunk of the action. Then one of the Battens made a big babyface comeback. And astonishingly enough, they end up getting the win over Killer Tim Brooks, which I did not expect to see happen. Crowd definitely popped for the finish. The Battens were always a tough case. Ideally, they should have probably been bigger stars than they were. I mean, they were good athletes. Definitely had likable qualities. They weren't the biggest guys, which probably didn't do them any favors. And at the same time, they were also coming up when the Rock and Roll Express were tearing it up across the country. And then later on, you had the Fantastics that kind of took over as a young, hot babyface tag team. Kind of let the Battens out to pasture. I don't know. I haven't seen a ton of Batten twin footage, but I've seen enough to think they could have been bigger stars had they been around top promotions longer. It was just never the right timing. I remember Cornette booked him in Smoky Mountain a few times. In any case, we come back for some mildly interesting footage, this time from Fort Worth. This part I actually got a kick out of. Bill Mercer sets it up by saying that Abdullah the Butcher had recently worked a match in Fort Worth where he wound up getting fined and suspended for attacking Jerry Allen and Bronco Lubitsch following a bloodbath encounter. And it was quite the bloodbath, no doubt. It's Abdullah just beating the holy fuck out of Jerry Allen for minutes on end. Jerry's got the crimson mask, to quote JR. But the thing that made me laugh about the whole suspension deal, when's the last time we even saw Abdullah work a match in Dallas? It's been a long time. And in his very first match back in God knows how long, he gets immediately suspended again. I will say, Bronco took a hell of a beating here. Did a great job selling when Abdullah took Gary Hart's walking cane and drove it into Bronco's sternum a couple times. I mean, just think, they could have picked any official to do this bump. They picked Bronco. What a trooper. And of course, you get the deal where Gary's trying to hold Abby back. The other officials come out and try to help Bronco as best they can, calling for someone to bring out a stretcher. And Well, this angle went on for a very long time, to the point where even Mark Lawrence was shouting on commentary, "Where are they with that stretcher?" And after a few minutes of stalling and Gary Hart trying to restrain him in the corner with his club, Abby ended up barreling over David Manning and made a beeline toward Jerry Allen again. I believe they eventually got Bronco out of there. It just took a day and a half. But that was your in and out look at Abdullah the Butcher. Showed back up to work one match in world class, and now he's banished from the territory again for jumping two officials and also a talent. Not that any of that should surprise anybody. It's Abdullah. He wasn't exactly known for being a professional technician. Then we had Blackjack Mulligan in action with Mark Youngblood. And we saw Blackjack's debut the other week when he ran out to attack Bruiser Brody in Fort Worth. So are all the activities happening these days? Maybe I should just start reviewing all the Fort Worth shows instead of the Sportatorium shows. In any case, Blackjack seemed to have been in the pocket of Percy Pringle when he showed up, but it was unconfirmed at the time. Well, now we do know that they're working together. There was a fairly big story development that Mercer broke during this match. Very odd time and place to do it. It had absolutely nothing to do with anything happening in the ring. But it is a fairly big news bulletin, so I'll go ahead and address it here. We were told that Missy Hyatt's father had taken issue with the way she was being treated in World Class, and apparently Missy left a bunch of open contracts on the table when she was supposed to wrestle Sunshine. So now those contracts will be filled by a new female talent who goes by the name of Raven. I have absolutely no clue who that would be a reference to. I do not at any point recall a female wrestler in the business named Raven. And because I was curious, I tried to look it up to see if I could find a wiki page or something. There are definitely references to Sunshine working with Raven in World Class, but to my knowledge, there was not any footage or even any photos of her that I could find. So I don't know. I genuinely don't know who this is or if I would even recognize who it is when she shows up. But that's all the information we got out of it. Missy is now on a temporary hiatus. And now Sunshine will be feuding with a mystery Raven in the interim. What if it just turns out to be Missy under a mask? That'd be fucking wild. Anyway, getting back to the match. It was cool seeing Blackjack with the signature glove. Always makes me think of Barry Windham anytime I see it. He definitely was not the worker that Barry Windham was. But you can see the family resemblance every time. So Blackjack got some heat for a while. They let Youngblood get in some hope spots. Then Blackjack cut him off with a back elbow and stuck him in the claw hold for the ref stoppage. I'm still kind of living in culture shock and realizing that Mulligan worked in Dallas in '86. Like I said the other week, he had been with the WWF for a couple years, working in main event programs with guys like Hogan and Andre and Piper. Like all of a sudden, he just shows up here in World Class in the summer of '86. I don't remember how long he's around, but it's cool to see him there. He wasn't exactly in the prime of his career by this point, but he could still go to an extent. So that brought us to the TV main event of Lance Von Erich and Chris Adams versus Rick Rude and the Great Kabuki. We also had a pre-match promo from Gary Hart, which was one of those promos where he just kind of set up a feud on the spot, even though we were never given any indication to think that this is the direction they were going. I'll explain. So he talks about Abdullah getting suspended in Fort Worth, but then he somehow turns the conversation around and starts going off on Lance and the rest of the Von Erich family, basically promising that Abby would be back come July 4th, that he would be setting his sights on going after the Von Erichs. And I'm like, okay, where exactly did that come from? It was a good promo. I liked when he said, pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. It was just a throwaway line that he threw in there for no particular reason, but he delivered it so well. Again, though, it's just strange because nothing about that heat angle in Fort Worth would make you think, oh yeah, Abdullah's definitely going after the Von Erichs when he gets back. I mean, Lance didn't even get involved. It was only the officials that got involved. You know, but Gary comes out here and talks about how the Von Erichs are all cowards, and I just couldn't figure out how any of this tied together. Rick Rude looked beyond bored during the ring intros. He's got the heavyweight belt over his shoulder. He just looked totally disengaged. 1 foot out the door. It's like he knew he was leaving soon and figured, yeah, I'm kind of over this place. Hey, I get it. He's been around for a while. And I liked Rick Rude, but he didn't always have the best reputation. His departures from territories were not always cordial. See the way he left Crockett Promotions. At least he didn't steal a belt this time. What else did I write down about this match? It wasn't a lot. Oh yeah, Lance had on a foot cast for some reason. I don't know if it had something to do with his ankle, but it was a big-ass brace. He didn't look like he was in any physical pain. I mean, he was definitely putting pressure on it. But I don't think it was broken. It was good to have Gary Hart team up with Mercer on commentary. Helped to get over more of the story with Abdullah and talking about him being wrongfully suspended. You know, basically saying that Abby doesn't understand English, so he couldn't really register the situation that happened in Fort Worth. Right. We'll go with that theory. Yeah, the action's pretty standard in terms of the heels taking control of things. At one point, they went after Chris's bad eye. There was a fairly awkward spot where Rude and Lance tried to do something before it broke down into the four-way. I still couldn't exactly figure out what they were attempting. And I watched it back like 3 times. They just sort of collided with each other, and Lance put on the claw hold. And while Kabuki and Adams were tangled up in the ropes, Ralph Pulley and Sunshine tried to get Kabuki off of Adams. Meanwhile, Percy smacked Lance in the back with his walking cane, and Rude crawled over to score the 3. And there was a bit of a post-match brawl where Rude ran Adams into the ring post right before the heels powdered. So, decent amount of activity going on here, just not a very eventful match overall. I think the key issue right now is the fact that we're still dealing with not having Kevin or Kerry around. To be honest, that's probably what's affecting the attendance figures. As much as they're trying with Lance, Lord knows they're trying to get him over, it's just... it's not working. I mean, the people like him, but he is certainly no Kevin or Kerry. The problem, though, is that he's being factored into the higher profile feuds right now, so we're kind of stuck with him. You know, I've really tried to be objective in my reviews of Lance, because I know people have shit on him in the past. Even the smarter minds of the business never really had a whole lot of good things to say about him. I mean, he seemed like a genuinely nice guy. I don't think he ever got the business. And the more I watch of him, the more he gets exposed. He's just not all that good. At the most, I could say he's a passable in-ring talent. Competent. Fine, but not Kevin or Kerry, unfortunately. But we will see how things develop with Gary Hart. I obviously won't be covering things for the next several weeks. I'll probably be back just in time so we see the tape delay footage of the Star Wars event, if I'm lucky enough. I'm hoping to at least get the chance to see Adams win the title, because I know that is a pretty historical moment in world class. Lord knows that we are desperate for some historical moments in 1986. It wasn't going to be Kerry winning the world title at Texas Stadium from the Nature Boy, but at least it will be something. But yeah, I think we're going to wrap it up on that note. So again, just to reiterate in case anybody didn't see the Monday show or for whatever reason you zoned out at the top of this week's show, this is going to be the last episode for a while. I think about 4 weeks is my game plan, but I don't know. It's all up in the air about return time. At the most, it'll be sometime in mid-July. But if you're somebody that's subscribed to the channel or you come back and check out the show every week, just note that that's going to be a thing. I'm not leaving everybody high and dry, but yeah. This will be the final podcast for temporarily 4 weeks, possibly 5. It's going to suck that I'm going to have to miss all that content, but I think it's just in the best interest for myself that I just stay clear of trying to pump all that content out, especially with the workload that I'm going to be dealing with. But that'll do it for now. I want to thank everybody that comes out to check out the show every week. And y'all take care of yourself. And we will meet again soon. Take care, everybody. Peace out.